We're back now with more of our exclusive on the HIV assault case of Philippe Perdue.
This is actually a lot more common than you think, Matt. I just had a woman walk into my office and tell me she was considering not telling her husband about her positive HIV status. And that's when I told her, I'm going to tell your husband because you're risking his life.
Well, for the women in Philippe's case, unfortunately, they didn't get the opportunity for that sort of intervention. Michelle Sagona has more.
After more than 4 years together, Diane Reeve has finally said au revoir to her cheating French boyfriend, Philippe Perdue. But the serial Casanova has left Diane with something she will never be able to get rid of.
He was having unprotected sex with a lot of women.
And one of those women that Diane had spoken to after finding Perdue's little black book has just discovered she has HIV.
And she, of course, was devastated.
As is Diane, who is so terrified she may have also contracted the disease that she immediately goes to her doctor to get tested.
And what happened?
2 days later, she called and said, I'm sorry, it's positive. And my knees hit the floor, and I remember very, very little about those next 24 hours because everything just imploded in my head.
Diane says she and the other infected woman had each asked Perdue if he had HIV or any other sexually transmitted diseases before they even had sex with him.
He had told both of us that he was negative.
They suspect that Perdue not only gave them HIV, but that he also did it knowing full well he was infected.
And she said, well, what should we do? I said, I think we should go to the police.
But a detective tells Diane and her friend they need more evidence.
Could be coincidence, have no way of proving it was him, could be somebody else altogether. But if you find 3 victims, or 4 victims, or 5 victims, then the prosecutor might take a look at it.
It takes Diane and her fellow victims 6 months to do it, but they track down 4 other women who had contracted HIV after having sex with Perdue. And he is charged with assault with a deadly weapon.
This was a very unusual case. One of the things that we had to prove was that the defendant in this case knowingly used a deadly weapon, that being the transmission of a deadly disease.
Curtis Howard, assistant prosecutor in the case, says the first thing his team did was subpoena Perdue's medical records.
Doctor's records indicated that he had gone in for HIV testing and that he was determined to be positive, and that the doctor had a consultation with him in which he was told that he was HIV positive.
And through the use of what is known as biogenetic analysis, a forensics medical expert nailed down the other challenge of the case.
He was able to determine the direction of transmission. And what that means is he was able to determine that it started with Philippe Perdue and was transmitted to the different ladies.
At a sensational and emotionally charged trial, 4 more women joined Diane and the 5 other victims to allege Philippe Perdue had also given them HIV. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison.
That's somebody who doesn't care about anybody else. He cares about one person, and that's himself, Philippe Perdue.
Why do you think Philippe was doing this to all of these women?
He is a hound. He is a dog. That's why.
But Perdue, who has now been behind bars for 7 years, remains astoundingly unrepentant, as he insists in our exclusive prison interview that he is not only innocent, but that Diane is the guilty one.
Where do you think you got HIV from?
From Diane.
You can sit here today looking at me in my eye and tell me that Diane...
Absolutely.
Perdue bases his accusation on the claim that he was diagnosed with having only stage 1 of the potentially deadly virus, while Diane was diagnosed with stage 3.
It's virtually impossible for an HIV person who's stage 1 to infect a person and give them stage 3. That's a medical fact.
Assistant prosecutor Curtis Howard says Perdue is wrong.
HIV affects people in different ways, and the way somebody's body responds to it is not indicative of the date in which they became infected with the disease.
Perdue also scoffs at the biogenetic analysis used at his trial to show he was the source of the HIV that infected Diane and the other women who testified against him, calling it junk science.
That doesn't meet any standard, scientific standard, forensic standards, for example, state or federal. It proved nothing. It doesn't prove that I'm the one that infected him. It's fraud. It's fraud.
Perdue further claims, despite what Diane says, they didn't have an exclusive relationship and that she also had other sexual partners while they were together.
We were never mutually exclusive.
So you were not exclusive. So what you're saying is you had an open relationship to date other people.
Diane was bisexual. She admitted being bisexual. She saw other men and other women throughout our relationship.
Perdue also alleges they even went to swingers clubs around the world together.
She was involved in the swinger set before I met her.
Diane denies his claims that she was bisexual and went to swingers clubs with him, and finds Perdue's accusation that she was the last source of the HIV literally laughable.
Yeah, he probably didn't tell you about the woman that we found that had been with him and came forward and said, no, I was with him in 1997 and I was diagnosed later on.
I asked him to explain how other women he had sex with before he even met Diane also contracted HIV.
I feel sorry for what happened, for all of us. But I also feel that they were guilty of sin. I mean,
do you admit that you had unprotected sex with all these women? Yes or no?
Yes, but that doesn't mean I infected them. It just means that they, at the time, they were having a lot of partners. One of them, I think, admitted having 10 to 15 partners.
Let me ask you this. Do you at all, sitting here today, take any ownership in any of this at all?
Well, of course I was promiscuous and I didn't use all the right protection, and I wish this hadn't happened to some of these women. I wish we had better common sense and knew more about HIV. But what these women did, they ended my life. So I wish they burned in hell, basically, and Diane especially, in a dark place in hell, because they lied, they denied, they committed fraud, perjury.
Where was that?
But Diane says it's Perdue who lied and denied, and she feels the full magnitude of his heartless crime is yet to be known.
Do you believe that there are more victims out there?
I know for a fact that there are more women.
And Assistant Prosecutor Curtis Howard pays tribute to Diane for having the courage to step forward and get some kind of justice for herself and Perdue's other victims.
She was a very strong woman. She was very strong-willed, and she was a big part of why this case was prosecuted.
And why other women are now safe from Philippe Perdue.
Just astonishing to me that after everything, he's still trying to paint himself as the victim. But there is some good news about Diane's health. She says she now has her HIV under control and is living a normal life. She's also written a new book called Standing Strong, detailing her case with the hope that it will help other women protect themselves.